koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki te hui o tēnei wā. Ko Liz McPherson ahau, ko komihana matatapu tuarua in INA. Ako nui aku mihi. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tata koutou. It's fantastic to welcome you all here today to the final session of our Privacy Week. We were just saying earlier that we started Privacy Week with a focus on Māori data sovereignty, and we are finishing with the same kaupapa. So it's fantastic to have you here today. I'm going to open with a karakia, and then we'll go on to talking to our two presenters. Tūtaua mai I runga, tūtaua mai I rau, tūtaua mai I roto, tūtaua mai I wā. Kia tau ai te Māori tū, te Māori ora ki te kato. Haumie, hui, tai. So as I said, kia ora koutou katoa, no mai haere mai ki te hui. The kaupapa for today is continuing on with a webinar that we had presented by Chris and Ernestynne last year in our 2024 Privacy Week. And their topic was myth. Māori data sovereignty is too hard. Now, we just had so many questions being put to Chris and Ernestynne that we simply couldn't have them all answered in that one session. So back by popular demand, the Ernestynne and Chris show to answer all of those unanswered questions that we had last time round. So the way that we're going to do this is I'm going to pass over to Chris and Ernestynne to introduce themselves shortly, but housekeeping for here. I have a copy of the unanswered questions in front of me. I'm going to go through them, and I'm going to put them to Chris and Ernestynne to respond to. There are a lot of questions, and as you know, they're often quite complex in terms of the thinking and the concepts that need to be discussed as a result of them. So we will work our way through them. If we have any time left at the end, put your questions, your pātai into the Q&A. Don't put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A. That's what I'll be looking at. And I will pick them up, and if we've got time, we'll put them to Chris and Ernestynne as well. But with that, can I just say it is fantastic to have you both back here today at the end of our Privacy Week for 2025. I'm going to leave you to introduce yourselves, and then we'll kick into the pātai. So Ernestynne, perhaps you'd like to start.
Kai, o tuatahi me mihi ka tika kia koe Liz. Nāna I tono mai kia kōrua, kia māua me ki. Kia kōrua o kia kōrero māua mō tēnei kaupapa hirahira. So nā reira ka nui te mihi kia koe.
Nā mihi.
Ko ai au, he uri no Ngāti Parau me te whanau apanui hoki. He no moana hau ki Pōneke. Ko Ernestynne Walsh tōku ingoa, he pau ārahi Raronga Māori ki Nipson Consulting. So lovely to be back again. I remember last year when the Q&A feed was just going crazy. And we just couldn't get through all of the questions. So it's wonderful to be back here again to answer some of these questions. I imagine some of them are probably still front and centre for a lot of people, but I also imagine there's probably some more questions that have popped up. So like Liz said, if there are those pātai, pop them in the Q&A, upvote the ones that you really want to hear about, and then we can get to those if there's time. But over to you, E Hoa.
Kia ora, Chris.
Tēnā tātou. Ai, taituku kua taituku ki ngā mihi, kua mihi a mai. Ko waio, he uri hau o kaitahu rātou ko Kātima Moi ko Waitaha hoki. No moerea ki hau ingari e whanau, ai noho ana au ki whanganui a tara I nāia nei ko Chris Cormack taku ingoa. I'm Chris Cormack. I do a bunch of jobs, but one of them is at Catalyst IT in Wellington, and I'm in the senior leadership team there. And then I also work with Te Kahuraranga up here in Rotorua, which is where I am today. And I've been lucky enough today to be making paints out of whenua, so out of earth, out of different colours of earth, and then making paintings and stuff. So I'm lovely and relaxed and all ready to get into these questions.
No, kia ora. I'm jealous, really jealous. All right, so let's get started. Now, the very first question we have is related to AI, which seems to have been the topic du jour during this week. Can you give us an insight into the threat AI poses to Māori data governance and sovereignty? I'm going to throw that to you first, Chris, and then perhaps come back to Ernestynne.
Okay. Yeah, so the way I like to think of AI, well, the main thing that AI needs is data. So AI takes data in, and the new kind of generative AI creates data. So it's all data really. So a lot of the same kind of rules and guidelines and stuff that apply to good data governance, good Māori data governance, apply to good AI governance. Having said that, the danger is that you have these, so it's not AI in general, but the danger is these massive corporations with their large language models that are built off data that's been collected without any consent process, without any regard for whose the data is, and there's no mechanism for Māori or anyone to say, take that out of your model or retrain on this set of data and stuff there. I think in a more kind of existential threat, the thing that a lot of these large language models do is kind of homogenize the way of speaking and the way of thinking. So I think that's a threat to all minority populations, because otherwise we converge kind of towards an American English way of thinking and speaking. And so, but for Māori data sovereignty, the danger is that people get excited about these tools, which can do fantastic things, and forget that you shouldn't just shove your data in it. You still should have to think through. If you're putting your data into these kind of tools, you're essentially training their models on your data. And sometimes it's not your data. So if you're talking about Māori data and you're a government agency, or you're a not-for-profit, or you're a school or whatever, have you gone through those processes of actually getting consent for that data to be loaded in that model and train that model? I think that's probably enough for me. I'll let Ernestynne add to that.
Kia ora, Chris. Ernestynne, did you want to add anything?
Hi, I was actually going to talk to the same point as Chris around the quality of data. Chris has articulated some of the risks in that space. And so maybe a different lens to look at this is the opportunities that it presents, particularly for our hapu and our communities. As you've heard from Chris and from others, you know, the models are as good as the data. And these days, the models are getting quite good. And I feel like a lot of people do share their kōrero tuku or the kōrero that's been passed down in the public domain, whether it's on the Marae website, whether it's on social media. And so I think that's one of the reasons these models are starting to get better. But I am still cautious of them. For instance, I had an assignment to do and I chose to write in our own meta, our own dialect. And I was like, oh God, if I put that into, you know, particular AI tools and ask them to check the spelling and grammar, it would flag it as all wrong because it's not used to seeing different dialects. But there are communities, we've got, you know, our trusted kaumātua, who do hold that information. Sometimes it's in their head, sometimes it's in written text, but I feel like that means there are opportunities for our communities as well, because they actually hold good quality data when it comes to revitalising our kōrero tuku and our reo. So while there are things to be mindful of, I think if you have the right people involved building these tools, then there can also be opportunities.
Right. And there's a second question which I think builds on what you just said, Ernestynne. Just interested if either of you want to expand using this as a prompt. How is Māori data sovereignty relevant in the generative AI context?
I think if I had to pick one Māori data sovereignty principle to look at, it would probably be the rangatiratanga one. just because we've only got so much time. And whilst that does speak to jurisdiction and where information and data is stored, it also speaks to the ability for Māori to self-determine and Māori to have control. And so coming back to my point, if you have the right people involved in building these models, then there are opportunities both from a revitalisation perspective, but also from an economic perspective as well. So I think that would probably be my kōrero, just to pick one Māori data sovereignty principle.
Chris, did you want to build on that?
Yeah, I think for me, I think the interesting thing was that the cool stuff that's happening with AI is not in these generative models. It's not in these large language models. It's in the small language models. It's in the machine learning. It's in the natural language processing. Things like Te Hiku, things that Te Hiku Media are doing, those interest me a lot more. Things that we could do with combining stuff like environmental sensors with our mātauranga Māori and our maramataka knowledge and predicting the best time to plant crop. These excite me far more. I think generative AI to me feels like a solution looking for a problem a lot of the time. I think you can have a lot of fun with it, but it doesn't really interest me. And I think large language models never work for small populations. So I think if we're talking about Māori, we need to be building our own models that are built on, like Ernestynne touched on Aoreo, and hopefully right down to the hapu level. We don't need to be able to speak every language in the world. We need our models to speak ours, because there's already other models that do the rest.
That's really interesting, Chris. I mean, I just think the Te Hiku work is just an amazing example of that, as you suggest, and the Rongo app that is built off that is just a fantastic facility for learning the reo, and developed by Māori for Māori and others. Right, next question. Do you have any insights regarding Māori data sovereignty in the library or archive space, thinking about the digitisation of text, etc., for the preservation or accessibility best practice, that sort of thing?
I think both of us could have a couple of things to say. One of the things I'll mention is that at Nicholson Consulting, we did do some mahi in the Māori records management space. That was following on from a Royal Commission of Inquiry. And so we looked at the existing record management processes, but we also looked to apply a Te Ao Māori lens. So one example specifically is around whakapapa, and how important that is from a cultural identity perspective. But when you look at record management, you know, there are specific rules set in place. And so it made it challenging, even if you did digitise the records around births and adoptions, there were still challenges around getting access to that information. So definitely would encourage people to have a look at that mahi if they're wanting to learn more in that space. But I also know Chris has done quite a lot in the library management space as well.
Right, Chris.
Yeah, it's good timing for this question, because Alicia, who some of you might have seen online already, she's quite prolific as a speaker, works with me at Catalyst IT. Her and I are off to Toronto for the International Indigenous Librarians Forum next month, and we're actually talking about these kind of topics as well. There's a lot going on in these spaces. I think museums are a little bit ahead of some of the other institutions in the idea that maybe we should give some stuff back. So you're already seeing museums repatriate taonga to where they belong, and so it's not too much of a step for them to think about how do we do that with data and stuff as well. So they're a little bit further ahead than some of the other places. Libraries are usually pretty good and pretty ethical organisations as well. So they're a little bit further ahead as well. There's a lot of work kind of being done in it's kind of related to Māori data sovereignty or Indigenous data sovereignty, but it's kind of more around the BADA principle, like that, not doing racist practices. So there's a lot of work in libraries around moving away from things like the Dewey Decimal System, which if you follow that, everything that's kind of mātauranga Māori ends up in the myths section, because that's how that system works. So moving away from harmful classification methods, moving towards using things like ngau ko tukutuku, which are Māori subject headings, for want of a better term, and moving towards more ways of categorising information in a way that's useful for or findable by Māori. And a good one of the things that generally archivists and librarians do better than a lot of places is metadata, so data about data. And as you know, one of the principles of Māori data sovereignty is whakapapa, is that data has whakapapa, everything's related to everything. And if you have that, if you know about your data, then it's much easier to look after your data. I think this is the bit that's, there is one hard bit about Māori data sovereignty, and that's if you have no idea what data you've got, that's the hard bit. So it's that classification and labelling ones, which I think kind of, even galleries as well, all those kind of institutions understand citations, they understand giving credit where credit's due. So they're far ahead of a lot of other organisations in that kind of space of data sovereignty.
Okay, actually, the point you make about knowing your own data and really understanding it and having it well organised and labelled is just so critical to being able to use it for anything, as well as protect it and respect it. So I agree entirely from a Māori data sovereignty perspective and otherwise. Right, now this next pātai might take me a little while to read out, but stick with me. Do you have an opinion about Te Tumu Paeroa, the Office of Māori Trustee, signing an agreement to use Microsoft's new Auckland Azure region? It would have been new at the time. When does use of US-owned Aotearoa located systems meet Māori data sovereignty? For example, TPP have said their agreement is based on their data sovereignty framework, but seem to have focused on location of data, not control of data. Being a US company, Microsoft is subject to the Cloud Act, and effectively that's the end of the question. So do you have a view or an opinion on that agreement and that use?
I mean, it's Te Tumu Paeroa, so really the question should go to them. Ruth Russell has always been really helpful. I've found she's supporting, well, she has supported Chris and I already on a project that we're currently working on, providing some of their whakaaro around how they integrate Māori data sovereignty into their current processes. But what I would say more generally is that when you look at storage solutions, effectively there is a spectrum. You know, things can be overseas, things can be in Aotearoa, but they're controlled by overseas companies. So as the person who asked the question articulated, you know, there are some considerations of that. You've also got locally owned options, which can be looked at. And then you've also got coming through quite strongly these days is Māori owned infrastructure and Māori managed infrastructure. So I think it really depends. It isn't a blanket scenario about this works or this is the best practice for every single organisation. It depends on what data you hold and also the key decision makers, the key people who the data is about, feeling comfortable with the solution that has been chosen.
Okay. Chris, did you want to add anything?
Yeah, I'd probably frame it more towards as they're working towards Māori data sovereignty. I don't think you can have tino rangatiratanga unless you have tino rangatiratanga, but I think you can be working towards it. So I don't think it meets my definition yet, but it meets their definition. And as Ernestynne said, that's their definition. So for me, it would need to be under, like ideally under Māori control, but next best under New Zealand jurisdiction only. Next best in New Zealand under New Zealand jurisdiction is someone else's. So I think they're not the ideal, but they're on a journey towards. The other point I want to make too is that Te Tumu Paeroa are a Crown agency. They're not Māori. The Māori work there, so they couldn't do Māori data sovereignty anyway. They could do Māori data governance in a way that could allow Māori to do Māori data sovereignty, if that makes sense. the way I'm saying it. So I'd say they were on a journey towards doing good Māori data governance. I think only iwi, only hapori can do Māori data sovereignty. Everyone else can do governance. That's the way I think of it anyway.
Kia ora. Thanks, Chris. So moving on to our next question. The person says, kia ora, Chris and Ernestynne. Can you comment on the implications of Microsoft setting up data centres in Aotearoa? I mean, I think this is a continuation of this same question. Will our data be safe in these centres, and is their mahi based on the principles of Māori data sovereignty?
Yeah, I'd say, as covered before, there is a spectrum. Chris has re-articulated that spectrum. So really it depends on what data is being stored there and whether key decision makers and people the data is about are happy with that.
Kia ora. Anything more from you, Chris?
Yeah, I think it's safer here than other places. I think if you look at so this question, my answer now is different than it would have been a year ago, because we've had an election in the US and we've seen big tech over there fold to the whims of the current administration. We've seen data be deleted at the behest of the government. We've seen things like the Navajo code talkers have themselves written out of the history, and I would not trust our data in the hands of that kind of thing. So I think here it's safer, and I think also should, for whatever reason, the 6 or 7 fibers that connect us to the rest of the world disappear, then we'd still at least have access to our data. So I think I'd flip it around the other way, and I'd always ask, is it safe to put it overseas? For me, it's always safer to have our stuff here. It should be for me, the kind of the overriding principles, it should be as close to the things and the people and the places that it's about at any given time. So I flip around that way, and there is stuff coming. There's a recently launched website on Monday, I think this week, te pātuwatawata.io. You can go have a look after this. That's a iwi built, Māori built, distributed decentralized storage network that's pretty close to being ready. So there's some more options coming along.
Right, could you just repeat the name of it?
Te Pātuwatawata without the macrons, because it's a URL. You can put macrons in URLs now, but people don't. So yeah, so .io at the .io. So yeah, there are more and more options coming along, and I think for me that decentralized and distributed is the way to make things safe. So multiple copies in multiple locations, geographically dispersed, is better than in a massive data center in Singapore or Australia or wherever it may happens to be. Thanks. We'll pop it in the chat.
Yeah.
Oh, excellent. I was just about to do that, but no, thank you for signalling that it has already been done.
All right, excellent. Okay, next pātai. Are there any particular public sector or private sector entities that do Māori data sovereignty well or are more mature along their journey?
It's funny what Chris was saying earlier around the GLAM sector, the galleries, libraries, archives and museums. I agree with Chris's whakaaro. And I've always admired the mahi that Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision does, particularly their Te Aki framework, but just the way they think about data, like it's not a mine perspective, which a lot of organisations tend to approach data from that lens. And so I've seen some of the mahi they've done. We talked about Te Huka Media and some of their work. I know there's been pilots with Ngā Taonga as well. So yeah, if I had to pick one organisation that I'd say people should take a look at, I'd pick Ngā Taonga Sound and Vision.
Oh, great. Chris?
Yeah, I was going to say.
From you?
I was going to say the same. Niwa has begun its journey and is doing some good stuff. They have a team kind of around this now, and so they have mechanisms for iwi or hapu to ask for the data about the area they're in. GNS is working on this as well. I don't know how they'll go when they all get merged together, but that remains to be seen. Yeah, and I think in terms of private organisations that are outside, I don't really know any off the top of my head, but there may be some doing it, because I think the thing is, often if you're doing data governance or Māori data governance well, no one notices. They only notice when you're doing it badly. Like that's when the problems occur. If you're doing it well, you're just doing good data governance, and people don't notice. So there may well be some doing some good things. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some in the not-profit sector doing it well.
Kia ora.
Actually, to add one whakaaro about the private sector, next week, Te Hapori Matahiko, the Māori tech community, has a session around Māori data governance in the fintech space. I'll be presenting alongside Payments NZ, so I think that's another organisation that people should look at. And for our Māori tech community members, if you're free on Wednesday, then come and join the session.
All right, so a shout out to people to join that session, and tell your friends as well. Okay, now, do you have any advice for a large government organisation about how it can get started in making sure Māori data sovereignty is front and centre in our ongoing privacy practice? I'll start with you this time, Chris.
Well, I'm going to be biased because I'm going to say just read the Māori data governance model. It's only 74 pages and not that big. But no, the thing in that model that I really like, and some of the work that Ernestynne's done as well, is that there are some guiding questions. And I think if all you do is ask yourself those guiding questions, you're putting yourself on a good start. I do think if we want to get serious about it, it needs to be policy, not guidelines. It needs to actually be something you have to do, and it needs to be kind of at the same level as any of the fiduciary constraints or any of those other kind of things that you need to do when you business case something. Part of that needs to be how you're going to do. And I think in a lot of ways, doing Māori data governance well is just doing data governance well. I think again, Māori are doing a thing that helps everyone, because basically, if you look after all data, if it was Māori data, following the Māori data governance models or the Māori data sovereignty principles, you're just doing really good data governance. So I think that just needs to be seen as equally important, because if you do that, you will end up with good results. You'll end up with good quality insights. You'll end up with valid results, valid reports that you can stand behind. And if someone challenges you on, did you have consent? You could say, of course we did, because we followed this model. So I think it's a simpler way to do it, and it just evolved. I think all it takes is the will of the organisation to say this is as important as how much it's going to cost or anything else.
Ernestynne.
I just threw my response in the chat. It was one of those, here's something I prepared earlier. I did my Masters of Māori Indigenous Leadership on implementation of Māori data sovereignty in the public sector. And so we've recently created a summary version, because a research essay is quite long to read. But that full research essay is publicly available, and so is the summary version. And I've just put a link in the webinar chat for those who want to find out more.
Great. And were there any high notes you wanted to hit on?
Oh, I think that in itself would be a presentation. But I'm sure as these questions keep coming, some of the insights will be drawn out.
Yeah. Okay. Next question. Obviously the person enjoyed your talk. They said it was fantastic last time around, and it is this time too. Do you know what is next for the Māori data governance model? Things have gone pretty quiet, is what they've said.
Maybe I'll deflect to our Te Kāhui Raronga person on the call first to provide that lens, because I don't think either of us could really talk from the government perspective and what Stats NZ might have in the pipeline.
So yeah, they're right. It has, stats did get quiet for multiple reasons. It was the census year last year, and so results year last year, and I mean we all know what's happened recently. There's been a bit of a shake-up, not a shake-up. There's been changes at the leadership and stuff there. They've got, and then there's a big push with the new social investment agency and what the IDI is going to become, and so their focus is not particularly on the model anymore. But I think it's being picked up by some other government agencies, and I think we kind of answered the question before. It needs that switch at that high, like at the DC or the even higher level to go, okay, this is an important thing. And whether you just call it data governance or you call it Māori data governance, but I don't really mind as long as it gets done. But it's that kind of, it just needs to be like, okay, we're going to do it and then just do it. I don't think it's too much more to it than that.
Yeah, kia ora. All right, next question. How do we build capacity in mana whenua to take control over their data? Who wants to take this one first?
I keep flicking to the Te Kāhuiraronga person because I know they've got some amazing programs that are currently in flight. So maybe you're best to talk about it, Chris.
Yeah, so there's a lot going on. I'll talk about people other than us to start with. So there's Puhoro STEM Academy, and they're doing some neat stuff as well. There's a growing number of kura kaupapa and wharekura that have increasing, adding some data analytics, data science kind of components to their what was it called? DTI, digital tech stuff. So it's creeping in there. At Te Kāhuiraronga we've been doing these data camps where we're having primary age school kura kaupapa kids, so 7, 8, 9, a little bit older sometimes, and teaching them about data and all the facets that may be through all sorts of things like through waiata, through stories, through all sorts of things as well. But then we also have an apprenticeship program. But it is one of the 6 Māori data principles and one of the 8 po of the Māori data governance model is around capacity and capability building, and it's vitally important. It's like you can't just do it. Like it takes quite a long time, and it's you need to have enough people. It's a kind of a snowbally thing, because if you've only got 5 people, then you can only kind of train 5 more, but then you can train 10 more, but then you can train, so you've just got to grow it slowly. There is a lack across the board of kind of everything to do with digital, so data, but also network engineers, electrical engineers, infrastructure engineers, software engineers. So it's not just that data lens, because if we're going to have all our own data, then we need places to store it, and we need people to look after that, and we need those kind of things as well. So it's a big thing. Again, though, if we do it, it's better for everyone. Like if we grow that capacity in Aotearoa, that won't just benefit Māori, that benefits everybody. So I think it's and everyone, it's one that no one really argues against. Like even a government of the day, which I don't agree with on much, won't say that we shouldn't grow capacity and those kind of growth things. They'll say it in different ways, but it kind of means the same thing. We need to grow talent here, not just import it in all the time.
Thanks, Chris. Any further comments from you, Ernestynne?
Maybe just to add a corporate perspective as well, because I know that quite a few organisations also offer internships too, which is fantastic.
Yep.
It seems that, like Chris said, it's slow, but you eventually build up that momentum, and I think that's one thing that the corporate world can contribute back to our communities. If these organisations are building up their skills and are able to achieve their goals, create a profit in the process, then that should also flow back to the communities. And so I think corporates should look at building up capability, but also acknowledge that it's important that people go back to their communities and contribute and share their skills as well. So I think that would be my tono, my request to those working in the private sector, also the public sector as well, to create those spaces, but also to make sure that you're building up capability that goes back out as well.
Kia ora. Right, this person's focusing on classification, po 8 in the governance model. So they basically said that they think that one challenge to implementing Māori data sovereignty is classification. They say, my problem is how such classification could be applied retrospectively to the thousands of records we have. I think retroactive classification is necessary, but I don't know if it's practically possible. Are there some resources to address this challenge?
I think we did talk earlier about Ngā Taonga, some of the mahi that they were doing with Te Huku Media. So there are solutions out there. I don't know any more details around how the pilot went, but I do know that there was the pilot with Te Huku Media. So there could be some options there when it comes to retroactive classification.
Chris?
Yeah, so for things written in te reo or video or audio, so the tools from Te Huku Media do a great job of transcribing, which is in a way that makes something discoverable that may not have been otherwise. But for English medium, so stuff written in English and other of the major languages, French, German, those kind of ones, then that's where LLMs might actually be useful. That you may be able to do some neat first pass of like, here's all my stuff, what is it? And then you still need subject experts to go through and go, no, this is wrong or this is right. But that's a lot faster than doing all that first thing. And that's kind of why the Kaituhi tool from Te Huku Media exists, because they had thousands of hours of audio. They have all the skills available in Te Huku in the far north to transcribe that. But do you want your fabulous te reo speakers spending their time transcribing, or do you want them to just fix the few errors in the transcription and be able to do something else instead? So I think in terms of those, that's some tools that might be useful. But also I think if you have this data and you don't know what it is, and then it's not useful anyway. So this is something you need to do, whether you're going to do Māori data governance or not, because you need, if you ever want to use that data, you need to know what it is and where it is and stuff. So it's kind of like, I think it's, yeah, it just has to be done. And if it takes ages, it takes ages. But unless you do it, that stuff is sitting there useless. So it's like, why are you keeping it at that point?
Kia ora. Next pātai, and I'm just conscious of time, so we're going to need to keep moving, otherwise we won't get through all of these this time either. If, as a country, we were to adopt Māori data sovereignty more broadly, what do you think would be some of the practical changes we would see in how data is collected and how we use it? Chris?
Well, I think the main thing we'd see is that hopefully we'd see that informed consent is being sought. So we wouldn't see these uses of data for you being used for things that they weren't collected to be used for. We wouldn't see this kind of idea that, well, we've collected it, so now it's ours, we can use it for whatever. We'd actually look at that kind of consent driven, and then hopefully the benefit with that would be a rebuilding of trust inside of some of our public institutions, a rebuilding of trust in science, a rebuilding of trust in stuff. So these kind of things that we used to hold almost sacred or thing have really taken a knock in the kind of conspiracy, post-COVID, anti-vax, all those kind of areas. And that, I think a lot of that is because of the lack of trust, because things aren't transparent. You don't know where that data came from. You don't know how it was collected. You don't know how these results ended up. If we were doing better data governance, better Māori data governance, then we'd be rebuilding some of the trust in some of our institutions, which I think is necessary for society to keep functioning, really. Once that breaks down, it becomes really messy really fast.
Ernestynne?
I should see maybe Heidi's on it.
Yeah,
We've got so many
I better keep moving.
pātai
All right.
outstanding.
Okay, so in a workshop, it wouldn't be recent now because it was last year, at New Zealand Government Data, the following was stated: all negotiations with a hapu or iwi, suggested whānau might be appropriate in some instances, regarding questions of data sovereignty should only be conducted between Māori with sufficient mana in your organisation and the leaders of the hapu or iwi. Pākehā cannot be involved directly. Do you agree with this, and what do you do in a low capacity environment?
It's an ideal, and I'm just smiling at Chris because we've also run a wānanga and we got given that similar whakaaro as
Right.
well, that iwi to iwi would have been a better approach rather than having the government or even consultants who are working on behalf of iwi in the room. And whilst I did agree with the whakaaro, I was thinking about the realities as well. If it was iwi to iwi, there are just so many kaupapa happening right now that it would be a very long time before they could even look at something like data. And so I think sometimes we need to be practical. And the other thing I'd say is that we also need to appreciate that a lot of iwi organisations do interact quite a lot with the Crown as well. And so if you have the iwi to iwi space only, then it might be a bit harder when it comes to implementation, when you're also interacting with these other organisations who haven't necessarily been involved. But I can see where people are coming from.
Kia ora.
The only thing I'd add was there really, that's like kind of the idea of mana motaki is that's a call for each hapu or each iwi to make. So I don't think we could blanket statement it like that either direction. So we can't say you always have to have Māori and organisation. Like that's up to the hapu if they want that to be their rule. That's their rule. It might not be my hapu's rule, but that can be their rule. So I think if we're going to do proper mana motaki, we can't treat all Māori as the same as well.
Kia ora. I've actually got a question on the screen which I'm going to ask. Where an agency is collecting data, e.g. from the public at large, would OPC, but I'm going to focus on you guys because you're our experts today, advocate for capturing ethnicity data at the same time, e.g. do you whakapapa Māori, if this information is not already being captured, i.e. solely for the purpose of knowing if the data being collected is Māori data? What do you think?
I mean, I guess it really depends. Like, I'd always come back to the purpose. Like, why are you collecting that information?
Yes.
We did some work recently with a membership body organisation, and they do have Māori members, but they wanted to collect iwi, and my question to them was, what for? What will you use it for?
Yeah.
Because there were just so few, it was going to identify who the people were, and I couldn't see the benefit, but I wanted them to tell me what the benefit was. So I think it really depends on the purpose and the benefit when each organisation, not even just government, but other organisations as well, look at collecting that type of information.
Kia ora. Anything, Chris? Shall we keep moving?
Oh, I think we just keep moving. I think Ernestynne said everything I would have said anyway.
Kia ora. All right. In a world where we manage our individual digital identity, what open source technology do you know of being built to manage and govern our data and the complexity of multiple overlapping collectives, whānau hapu, papa hapu, trusts, iwi? Basically making the point that Māori data and privacy requirements are not homogenous.
I don't know of any.
Yeah.
Not in the open source space. I know some neat stuff. There's ora.io that's around capturing iwi registers and whakapapa data, and that's really neat, but I don't think it's open source. It needs to be done, and ideally, in my worldview, again, there's multiple. Māori aren't homogenous. In Chris Cormack's worldview, open source is the way to achieve proper data sovereignty, because then you're not beholden to some proprietary vendor who may or may not let you use your data at some later stage. But no, off the top of my head, I don't know any open source software that would. Okay. I think you could build it with a collection of pieces, but I don't think there's a single piece at the moment.
Right. Kia ora. Next pātai, is there any work happening across the public sector to ensure that when we are contracting with Māori kaitono, there is consistency in our contractual clauses re data capture, storage and sharing?
Well, from the work that I did on my master's, I did find that procurement teams were actually quite interested in Māori data sovereignty, and they'd come in enthusiastically ask us a lot of pātai. But what I did find in those scenarios was that it was organisations who were going through large transformation projects. So they already were going to market. They wanted to ask some questions around Māori data sovereignty as part of the assessment criteria, but they weren't sure what to ask. And so those organisations that do have those big transformation projects were looking at selection criteria and questions, but I don't think there's been anything done across the board in the government space. It seems to be more individual organisations doing it as when there's a need.
Right. Do you think there's any space for doing something a bit more consistent across government?
I think that was probably one of my other learnings from the Masters, that each organisation was doing things. And my thought was, you know, that would be so helpful for another organisation. So I definitely think that there is space and it would be a useful opportunity, particularly whilst I did look at the public service departments and departmental agencies, the public sector is quite huge and there are a lot of smaller organisations who don't have the same resources at hand. So I think creating something collective, at least a high level version, would be quite beneficial, and then organisations can tweak it to suit their specific context.
Kia ora. Okay, next question. So where Māori data is extracted from shared systems, how is Māori data protected on both systems, those extracted from and those being stored, analysed on? It's a very open question. How can you do that?
I mean, with some of the work we have done with organisations where they have been sharing data, we tell them rather than to email a file, which was what they were historically doing, we said send them a link, manage the access, make sure the link expires after a certain period, make sure the right people have access to that link. And when you're in that scenario, then there aren't multiple copies floating around, so it does make it easier to manage in that type of context.
Kia ora.
Yeah, I think, and just to build on that, it's about relationships. So that there needs to be those relationships between those organisations that are sharing it and the ones that are using it, such that they can create those rules and stick to them and stuff that way. So yeah.
Kia ora. Oh, this is actually our last pātai for the day, or at least from last year. We have had the one question on the Q&A so far. This one is, there are many iwi hapu entities with a high need for data management, infrastructure, governance, management, etc. Are there any funds or initiatives available to support how they take their next steps?
It's a hard space. I've had this kōrero before, particularly around iwi investment when it comes to tech. There isn't very much in that space. I can think of one example of Ngāroru, invested in, I think it was one centre. And then more recently, we've got the likes of Tirunanga or Toa Rangatira who have invested and purchased a 1/3 stake in a cloud company. So at least in the iwi space, it's less common to see funds available to support in that space, but occasionally you do see it coming through. But I think there's probably other places that have probably had more success. And I'm not sure if Chris wants to speak to some of the mahi in that space that you've seen as well, e hoa.
Yeah, I think for me, I think the most pressing need is in that capability and capacity space. So if we had more network engineers and infrastructure engineers and stuff, we could build our own, smaller data centers really fast. We just don't have, there's not that many of us. I think were we to buy a whole lot or build a whole lot, then we still need those people to look after them. So I think that's where I'm hoping that investment and funds and stuff go into that that kind of building capacity and capability, such that iwi and hapu can build their own whatever that they want that to look like, or invest in, but have people from the iwi working there or from the hapu working there, so that you actually are exercising more of your mana mutaki than just contracting it out.
I've just had a couple of questions come in. So with the 9 minutes that we have left, first question, the Privacy Act has exemptions to consent when data will be used for research purposes, because it's often impractical to obtain consent when the data was collected historically. Without these provisions, a lot of good research would probably be impossible. Would you suggest these provisions would need to be overturned to allow for the full prior and informed consent element of the Māori data governance model? If so, how would you enable research to continue when consent can't be obtained? I would make the point that the Privacy Act is not a consent-based model, but moving right along.
I think for me, I would flip that. So there's a lot of bad research being done and has been done and continue to be done on data that was obtained historically with no consent and is bad quality data. So I argue that doing it the right way will lead to better results. I think there's a myth that we have been doing good data science, but we haven't. We've been collecting, we've been working on flawed data sets and coming up with flawed conclusions since colonisation began. So I think, yeah, that's my premise. I think I fundamentally disagree with the premise that we're doing good research. So for me, the question doesn't make sense. That's my kind of Friday afternoon answer.
Okay, Ernestynne.
Whilst the Māori data sovereignty principles do talk about full prior informed consent, it also talks about other mechanisms as well. And so when we have looked at some options with clients, we've talked about, well, rather than consenting every single time, can you consent to a specific, whether it's a specific kaupapa or a specific type of data that can be used in a specific context, and that can help obtain that consent, but not to do it in a way that's so burdensome. Like I think of online, whenever you go visit a website and it's like, please accept every single cookie, and then you get annoyed and just accept them all and don't even look. So I think there's also that consideration about full prior informed consent, that sometimes people can get consent fatigue, but there are solutions out there to deal with that, and there are other approaches when it comes to Māori data governance. So if you didn't get the full prior informed consent every single time, there are things that you could at least do to minimise some of the harms that Chris has spoken about.
I agree, and I think, I mean, from my previous stats background, there was always, in using, for example, the IDI, a requirement to have worked with your community of interest. That's certainly a way of making sure that the previous research was actually appropriate, the findings were appropriate, and to work from there. Next question. Any thoughts on managing the tension between collective and individual privacy and data rights? A Māori individual may not want their data shared with an iwi group, for example.
I do remember one project we were on, it was a consultation project, and so you can give feedback as yourself, you could give feedback as part of the iwi or another collective. And we were specifically talking about that example about an individual's opinion versus the opinion of an organisation versus the opinion of a collective. And when we were sorting out the consent forms, we said, well, why don't we just ask people if they consent to their information being shared with their iwi? Then it's their decision rather than us trying to put something in place. So I think those sorts of examples can help when it comes to collective considerations. Yeah, Chris?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. It's always balancing. It's like, I think the way I think, and a lot of other people think, is that being part of an iwi comes with obligations, and one of those obligations might be that you share your data with them. So it's that balancing kind of that rights and obligations kind of idea. And sometimes the obligations are, if you can't, well, not you can't, but if you claim an iwi, then there are obligations that come with that. So that's something that you have to work through in your own kind of how that plays out for you as an individual. But for me, I think if I'm part of an iwi, then what the iwi asks for, within reason, I think is not mine to say no to.
Kia ora. And I guess, again, the point you were making earlier, Chris, about, sort of Māori data governance being good data governance is under the Privacy Act. If you've got the opportunity to talk directly to the person concerned, talk directly to the person concerned. That's the sort of best source of the truth. This is going to be our last question. For environmental data, aka information about the environment, hapu and iwi have relationships with aka Māori data. Have you seen practices to repatriate data to hapu and iwi? It's quite a long question, so I'll stop at that point.
I think from a practical perspective, putting that pātai on, that hat on again, one of the things that I have seen from when we have worked with organisations that have that focus on te tai ao, is that the Māori teams within those organisations, one of the levers they use is lease agreements, particularly when they need to be renewed or you're going to a new place to collect samples of data. That can be the opportunity to put in some specifications around data, whether it's repatriation, whether it's sharing information, how it's used. So that's one lever I have seen organisations working in the environmental space leaning on the lease agreements.
Kia ora. Okay, well, I think that's probably time for us to wrap up. Can I just, I don't know if either of you had any last word prior to going?
Maybe just to reinforce that there are some really useful links in the chat.
Yep.
Chris has spoken about Te Pātu Wata Wata, and some of the organisations Chris and I are working with at the moment have been very keen to see what's happening in that space. So definitely recommend people keep an eye out on that link. And then there was also the link to the master's research around implementation of Māori data sovereignty in the public sector. Yeah. Chris?
No, I just let's just do it, eh? Let's just start doing some better data governance.
Kia ora. Kia ora. Well, ngā mihi mahana kia koroa. Thank you so much for coming back again. Popular demand. I've got no doubt that we'll probably be invited back next year. It's been fantastic to be able to just, facilitate you sharing your expertise with people out there. So can I say thank you again, ngā mihi mahana, to everybody on screen. Kia pai tō rā whakata. This is the end of our Privacy Week. It's fantastic to have had you all part of it, participating in it. It's been our most successful one so far. 6,000 people have watched things so far, even prior to this particular webinar. So we're just delighted. And I'm going to close this webinar with a karakia. Te whakihetangi e, tēnei te kaupapa kai e, tēnei te wānanga kai e, te Māori o te kaupapa ka whakamoia, te Māori o te wānanga ka whakamoia. Hua ki runga, hua ki raro, haumi e, hui e, tai ki e.
I was just noticing the red button. I thought, best wait for that to stop. But I think the team can crop that off at the end.
I think so.
There we go. And is there a way to leave this?
Yes, just like that.
There we go.